I was born in the South Bronx. My mother was born and raised in Harlem. My father was born in upstate New York, Newburgh, I think it was. When I was born, it was a great migration from Harlem to the Bronx because Harlem tenements were really crowded and overpriced. So we moved just across the river, probably only a mile from where my mother was actually born in Sugar Hill. I stayed in the Bronx all the way up until I was 15 years old, and I ended up, my mother moving to Detroit after a while, of all places. I had no idea. I thought Detroit, for me, coming from the Bronx, was like the suburbs. I had no idea it was supposed to be the murder capital of the world.
Well, tell me about the book.
The Universe Next Door is my second book of short stories. The entire theme around the book is, at least the way I was thinking about it, is in life we go about our daily duties, work and school and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we don't see a lot of the things that's going on around us. It's like different types of subcultures that we don't experience, or there's different metaphysical things that might be happening at the same time that we going about our daily lives. So in this particular book, in this particular collection, I was just simply trying to capture some of the things that go on that maybe people can't see. When you pass that stranger has a life of his own too that you don't know about. And then there's the question of what is reality and what is not reality. When I say the universe next door, it means metaphysically it means something like a whole world that we are living next to, but we rarely, for whatever reason, get a chance to glance into it.
With this story, it's 10 stories, and it bounces around a little bit within stories. I want to know, did you write this all at once, or are these stories that you had for years, like childhood stories?
Most of those stories in there, unlike my first book, which was a bunch of stories that I had wrote over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Most of the stories in there were new, and I was looking for that particular theme that I was, telling you about. And it was a couple of stories that was written, beforehand a couple of years ago. So, what was the question?
I was just wondering, was it all when you wrote the stories? Were they stories that were laying around, or were they stories that you put together for this book?
All of them were written with the kind of the theme that I had in mind. Yeah. All of them were written to try to peer into maybe sort of some type of supernatural phenomenon and exactly. Things like that. And so I chose to write stories that dealt with those kind of things. Plus, I've been reading certain books by Brian Greene and other physicists that talk about mathematically it being possible of being separate worlds and separate universes, with different iterations of ourselves. And that influenced me a lot when I thought about, the universe next door. As a matter of fact, the title itself was from one of the books by Brian Greene. And I'm just fascinated by that. But I'm also fascinated by the mathematical possibility of it being multiverses and alternate realities and all that stuff. But I'm also fascinated that we have alternate realities in this one universe already. Yeah. Because we have a bunch of people that live lives in this country that is so far removed from other people in this country because this country is so diverse. And so when I say the universe next door, I might mean sort of like the Brian Greene version of this mathematical possibility. But at the same time, I mean things that's literally going on right next door to you or right down the street or in another city, because the diversity in our country is probably greater than any other
And I,
place I've
I
ever
noticed
seen.
with a lot of the stories, it seems to share like a drugs is involved in a lot of stories, even though it's like the universe next door. Do you see drugs?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the reasons why there might be drugs or some kind of altered, somebody's taking someone with some kind of altered state, because I wanted you as a reader to like feel like, did he really see that, or was it part of his, his intake, of certain drugs and stuff like that. So I didn't want to make it explicit that this is what really happened. I want you to think maybe it happened or maybe it didn't happen, and as a reader, you can come to your own conclusion. So if I didn't throw that sort of wrench in the works, then it would have been literal. Like, okay, well, this really did happen. He didn't take drugs. But if I say that he took drugs or somebody ingested something, then you could scratch your head like, I wonder. So that's what.
Yeah,
that's what I wanted you to think.
That's one of the things I liked. There was like an interesting concept of it could be drugs, or it could be like, another universe, 3 dimensions stuff happening,
Yeah.
another dimensions. And also what ran through my head was mental illness, probably. It seems like a story that's a lot from your childhood. I couldn't help but to read it like, did this really happen to him as a child? Because they're believable stories, and at the same time, it could be something like out of the ordinary. Like, and then there's also the question like, are they on drugs? The library is called.
Well,
yeah.
when there's trauma, when someone has emotional trauma, PTSD, from being in combat, and as you know, you don't even have to be in combat to have PTSD. You can just live a certain life in a certain area. We had way more people die in Chicago recently than we had people being killed that's in this war that we've been in the last 15 years. So PTSD could affect a lot of different people, and it does affect a lot of people, and it can get to you. And things happen, and sometimes you wonder about the reality around you. I read a book a long time ago called Bloods, and one of the stories, one of the gentlemen was he was a POV in a Vietnamese prison camp, and he was delirious because of the fever he was under. He had some injuries and he had fever, and when you under a sort of spell like that, the fever, all kind of wild and fantastic things came out. And one of his things was he dreamt that every night he dreamt that he used to fly across the countryside. And the thing about it, after he won a Congressional Medal of Honor actually. But when he came out of the camp finally, when he was liberated, he found out that the countryside that he used to at least mentally fly over was pretty much accurate from what he's seen, and he was able to find his way around. And it makes you wonder, like, well, what is the reality? What happens when your brain can go to another level? Was he actually crazy? Was it a coincidence? Was he really familiar with the countryside? So we really don't know because we're not in his shoes, but it definitely gives you something to think about in that relationship, Well, I think, and I can only speak for myself, but it would seem to me that most writers walk around with all kind of ideas and stories in their heads anyway. And where do they take it from? Of course, they take it from their own life, things happen. So no matter what story I write, there's a little bit of my own personal experience in it. Maybe not in the character or the characters, but just things I might have witnessed. I've had really strange supernatural things happen in my life, that till this day, is a head scratcher.
Supernatural things that happen in this book, but that also could be like true.
Yeah.
That's the thing I like. Like, yeah, it was supernatural in a sense.
Yeah.
But those things could really happen.
Yeah.
So I like the way you put those together.
Yeah, and and again, I never wanted to be explicit. Like, like this is actually what happened. I wanted people to think. I wanted people maybe to feel a little unease. I've read stories before where I felt a little unease because the denouement, the wrapping up of things just didn't happen the way I had envisioned a classic story to do. But what's also funny about that is that those are the same stories that really stick to me. You know, he didn't wrap it up for me. I have to come to my own conclusions, and I like it, even though I might feel a little bit uneasy about the result. I like that. I'd rather have somebody read my stories and have like a negative, visceral feel about it because I made them feel uncomfortable, than have something like that's wrapped up nice and tidy with strings and all that kind of stuff, and boom, here it goes. This is the beginning, the middle, and the end. But that's not exactly what I was interested in doing.
Okay, in the story, the man with the gun is coming. Now, the guy was he was smoking weed.
Yeah.
And also that happened. So would you leave that? Would you want the reader to kind of guess for themselves, like you were saying, or would you? Do you know what it is?
I want them to come to their own conclusion because.
But do you have one, like of all these stories? Do you have your own conclusions of what they?
Some of them, yeah, not all of them. And that particular story, in my head, and I would let the reader. I don't want to reveal exactly what I really think, but in my head, I have the feeling that I know what really happened. But I'm not going to say whether it had anything to do with the weed or not. But he heard that baby actually talking, and even if it was the weed, somebody still showed up or something showed up. You know what I mean? So I let the people read that conclusion, and sometimes whether you're religious or not, I think sometimes. The part of the being human that we can't understand are the things that we can't see, and feelings that we have. People close to us, we can actually feel when something goes wrong. There's something to that. That's something that you can actually feel. And I think that primordially we always have some of the things left over from us from the very beginning of mankind that warns us of things. And a lot of times sometimes it's just an ill at ease feeling that something is not right or something is going to go wrong. And sometimes your gut is right. There's been plenty of times where I had a gut feeling in my life that since it had no basis in reality or it wasn't logical, I kind of dismissed it, and it turned out like my gut was right. And that happens to everybody. So that baby might have represented his gut feeling about something, and that was coming. So, and it would manifest itself through a talking infant, so things like that could happen.
Do some of the characters carry on through other stories?
Not purposely. I think in your head, like when I read a Stephen King book, for example, even though there's different stories, different times, and all this sort of thing, a lot of his characters, I can read one paragraph of a character and I know it's a Stephen King character. And he has some of the same characters over and over again, and I don't know, I never interviewed the guy or talked to him, but I think a lot of those characters are him, of different variations of him, because we always have different variations. I didn't purposely try to put different characters in there, but I think as a writer, sometimes you can't help it. Whether I'm talking, whether my main character is a little kid, or whether it's a woman, or whether it's a white person, I think you can't help but pour in a little bit of yourself that's going to be in there. You try not to, at least I try not to, but there might be a string of familiarity within certain characters, but it definitely wasn't by design.
The story about the one in Detroit, the abandoned house, and the daughter and the camera guy.
Yeah.
Okay, you grew up in Detroit.
Right.
So was that story, was it like that, like abandoned buildings? A lot of people.
Not when I was there.
Okay.
I left a long time ago, but it's definitely like that now. And what I really hate, what I see like on YouTube is what they call it, ruin porn. That's a thing, ruin porn, where guys come from all over the country and drive around Detroit to film abandoned places, and that's a big thing. They go, exploring, and they look at the old factories and old hospitals. But what they forget is like, people still live here. This is their home. And I think those people are being exploited. And that's part of what I'm talking about. That's a whole new universe where you have a family living in a desolate area in the middle of a desolate city, trying to survive. And all of a sudden, things get so bad, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, vultures come out of nowhere because they can make a living in this place. Packs of wild dogs and all these things. These things are all true, and again, it's a world that's going on right now. It's right about under our nose, and we don't think about it. And people like this woman and her daughter, they exist, and we, as a general rule, we kind of look over that, or we don't look at it at all. But that's another universe that's next door to us. This is Detroit, Michigan. This used to be one of the greatest cities in the entire world, and now it's.
And you would think with somewhere it's in the United States.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you would think that these people would at least try to get out the city or move out. Or go other places.
A lot of people who are not from certain places think that why don't you just leave? And maybe it's not as easy as that. And maybe at a certain level they don't want to leave. They want to fight it out. They have and hope that things are fucked up right now, but maybe they're going to get better. All we got to do is continue to survive any kind of way we can, and things are going to get better. It can't remain this way. And I honestly believe, and I hope that I'm not being blindly optimistic, that things will change. I have that feeling. If I had the feeling that the way it is, or the way it's been, is going to go on for the next 30, 40 years, then that's a pretty bleak outlook. But when I see places like that, but I see also people that are staying, that choose to stay, and they actually building the neighborhood up. They may turn these places into gardens and parks and that sort of thing, where people could come together. That's a positive thing. It brings out also the best of people, and that's, what more can you ask for?
And I had to wonder, like, is this really happening to this guy? He goes to his high school reunion, nobody recognized him. Like, no matter where he goes, nobody recognizes him. Like, is that in his head?
Maybe, maybe not. Now, the thing is, I love stories about people who end up in a place that looks very familiar, but is very different. Rod Serling, from the Twilight Zone, he had several episodes that dealt with that same theme, and he did it very well. But to me, it's always intriguing, because in my life, I'm walking down the street, I've noticed something that's been there all along, but it seemed like it just came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, where did this tree come from? I've been walking down the street, I've never seen this tree before. Or where did this house come from? Or this person lives next door to me and I've never seen, So we see these kind of things. And I always thought that if we went to a different universe, I got the feeling that it would look so much like ours that you wouldn't notice, because instead of in the next universe, instead of this sitting here, it would be sitting over here. You know what I mean? And that might be the only difference in that particular universe, because if it's a possibility for it to be several different universes, then I'm thinking a lot of them look very much alike. And I'm thinking that every time we make a decision, we might be making a different universe. And every once in a while, since we making decisions, should I turn left here or should I turn right here? You're making this one possibility came through, but the other possibilities will also could have happened too, but they happen maybe someplace else. So I just think that it's not going to be that much notice. Like you said, oh well, so and so almost died. Well, maybe he did in another place, but this place he lived, and now he's living in a place that looks exactly like his. But every once in a while, and this is just Mr. Russell's theory, every once in a while you catch a change. You catch something that nobody else sees that's different. Like, wait a minute, this was not here. I swear to God, this was not here, or this wasn't like this. Every once in a while, when you change in these universes, there you will see a change, and you see a big change. And the way I look at it, if you look at a fork, if I had a fork, no, not a fork, but a comb that was like this long, and I have all of the teeth of this particular comb. In the middle, say if your universe was in the middle of that comb, and you travel to one right next to it, you can't see a difference. Right next to it, you can't see a difference. The only way you would see a difference, that comb would have to be stretch 1,000,000 miles long, and you would have to go way on the other side of that comb. That's when you would really see a difference. You know, like you would have a different president, or you would be missing a brother and sister, or have an extra brother and sister. But the universes that are next to each other, they very much alike. And while you're switching because you're making different decisions, you just can't tell the difference. But they all exist. You see what I mean?
Okay.
And the intriguing part is that what I'm thinking in my head as a writer is like, again, every once in a while, you see a difference and you know it's a difference, but nobody else does because they've been there all along.
The sense of power. In the story, the guy with the binoculars, where does his life go?
The thing about his life, in my head, it goes absolutely nowhere, because his life ended, you know, metaphorically, of course, a long time ago. He decided to, and I've seen people like this, he decided to, as a grown man, you know, a full grown man, to move in with his mother and take care of her for a number of years. And he didn't need his own place. He didn't need kids. He didn't need a wife, a house. That little thing for him was good. His little job with him was enough. He didn't think, he's a person who's not thinking about being upwardly mobile. He is set where he is. He's set. He's done. Stick a fork in him. And that was his life. So that's why he would sit at the window and look out and glean things like, you know, what's going on in the street. The drug dealers who's he afraid of. He don't want nothing to do with them. He stay away from them. You know, they look up and he duck. You know, so his life was done. He might have moved in with his mother when he was 40 years old, and he probably didn't have much of a life for that. Maybe he never even moved out. Maybe it was always like that, and he was good enough. And I've known people like that. I worked with people who don't even want promotions because they was just good with putting the square pegs in the square holes, and that was it. That's what they would do all day. So that's what he was satisfied with his life. So when the story ends, you can expect nothing else that's going to happen to him that's going to be remarkably different.
They going, that was my entertainment. And
that's his life. The garden and making the soup, and nothing is going to change for him, you know. And my thing is, too bad for him.
Yeah, whatever he sees out the binoculars is his life.
Right.
What he's doing.
It's too bad for him because he's not living his own life. He's being a fly on the wall of the lives of other people, and he's not really doing anything to make changes in his life. Just leave me alone. I'm fine. And you know, I said every character is. I always say every character is. You have a part of you. I would like to think I would have no part of that type of character, but I've seen people like that, and I'm like, how can you live like that? You know.
The Twilight Zone with like stuff happen, it could be real, but it's always a twist.
Yeah, and it's always a twist because you should think of in all of these different worlds, and like in that particular story, you have a big time drug dealer, right? And you have a big time drug dealer, and he's the king of his universe. He's the king of his world. You know, when I said that he sits at the top of the steps, I kind of mean that literally and also metaphorically. Like, he's literally sitting at the top of the stoop, and everybody else is down. You see? So that symbolizes that he's the king of his world. But there's something or someone else out there from a different world, from a different paradigm, you know, from who who's stalking him for whatever reason. I never made clear, but he's stalking him. And what it reminds me of, when you look at these wildlife shows, and you see, like, you know, regardless of what animal is, there's always an alpha male in that particular group of animals. He's in charge of everybody. He can kick everybody's ass, and he's the king of his world. But every once in a while, a leopard will come around and eat him up, because he's the king of his world, but the leopard is also the king of that world too. Because when a leopard attacks those animals, he attacks the alpha male. He attacks the one on top, not the minions, and it sends a message, you know. And that's the kind of thing that I was trying to convey. Like, this guy was a big time drug dealer, but at the same time, there was something else out there. It was another, like, you know, you can say it was a leopard out there that was stalking him.
Wow. It's and the reason why I like that story, because he's like the only drug dealer. So many people on drugs, questionably on drugs, but this is the drug dealer, and it's like his point of view. It's like everyone, I'm like, is that real or is it fake? But here you have a drug dealer that's really paranoid. He really has a killer after him. Somebody's really watching him. But he chose it. Everyone else seems to be worried about it. He chose his life and everybody else didn't. And throughout the stories. Which I really like. With the library, the grandson actually saw the people, but the librarian didn't. Do you think that kids are more accessible to this universe?
Yeah, and that's the one. I always like the idea, and I know it might be a cliche, but I always like the idea that kids and dogs can see things that nobody else can. Babies and stuff. I remember the movie To Sleep with Anger. It was this guy who was kind of an evil guy, and I loved that movie because it's actually like the kind of stories I like to write. And every time he would reach for this woman, the baby would kick the mom and she couldn't touch him. And I always liked the idea that babies, I don't know, like I said, it's kind of cliche, but I always liked the idea of babies and dogs. And that maybe it don't have to be a baby, but it got to be a little kid. And one of the reasons why I like that in both cases of babies and dogs is like the innocence of what we think about babies and dogs. You know, dogs are innocent. If they like you, they wag their tail. If they don't, they won't. Kids are brutally honest. You know, they don't think about those things. If they love you, you know it, you know. If they don't love you, you know that too. And so, in my head, if that honesty is paid off by them being able to see things and sense things that you think they can't, but they can. And so that's why I had the little boy was able to see the people in the library. It wasn't because she was just like the rest of us. She was already a grown woman and jaded, and these sort of things don't exist. If these sort of things don't exist,
sort of like Santa Claus.
Then if these things don't exist, we won't see them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you don't.
The basketball star. Mm-hmm. Do you know any?
Yes. But yeah, all that story, all I see is a blur. I've grown up in the Bronx. I went to high school in Detroit, but I was born and raised in the Bronx. But growing up in the Bronx, I heard a lot of stories about basketball players, and it was just that. It was stories. Like, I've actually never seen a lot of the people who they talk about. You know what I mean? I just heard of them. I said, I can't wait to see this guy. And there was a period where I actually found out when I got older, one of the guys I used to always hear about in the streets, who was a legendary basketball player. When I found out who he was and I actually seen him, it was like it diminished the myth that I had of him. And it wasn't good enough. And just like with the old movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, is like when the legend becomes a fact, print the legend. And I always thought that now that I've seen this basketball player, I wish I didn't see him, because I wish that he would have remained the legend that was in my mind. But now that he was flesh and blood, it was a whole different story, you know, in my head. So in this particular story, I wanted, it was like my personal fantasy. I wanted this basketball player, even though that he actually seen this play in the flesh, at the same time I wanted him to remain a myth. I didn't want him to speak with him directly. I didn't want him to touch him. I didn't want him to interact with him whatsoever. And he just, you know, disappeared in a snowstorm. So that was purposeful, and I wanted the reader to know, like, yeah, the guy was apparently real because he's seen him and everybody else seen him. He's actually, you know, he's playing a basketball game, but at the same time, since he's a myth, it's ephemeral. You know, you still can't touch him. You know what I mean? And I wanted him to remain that way. So, yeah.
Between The Universe Next Door and Urban Crow is also like stories, a few stories in it, just like the same format as this one. What would you say would be the difference from the stories?
And to be honest about Urban Crow, I didn't realize until after it was finished, when I read about it, it was easy to see that the theme was death, and I'm like, how is that possible? But I'm not one of these person that's preoccupied with death and all this other. I never was. I mean, death is to me like would be like it is everybody else. It's kind of a mystery. It's kind of like, whoa, you know, and all those same feelings. But apparently, at least subconsciously, it must be some type of I don't know. Maybe I just have a thought about the finality of death. That is a great. I like to think about death as a great equalizer, because no matter how much money you got, you're still going to die at a certain point. Most people don't live to be 100, and a lot of the people who do live to be 100, a lot of them are not rich. You know what I mean? So a poor man can live just as long as a rich man, and no matter what you do, death is coming, and it's always coming. And it's just like abandoned houses. It's like, this used to be a life. This used to be something where people would come and meet, and that's how a life is, where, you know, this guy or this woman was really popular, or they did this, or they influenced that, and then there's no more. There's a certain poetic, beautiful finality about death, and it's like it's very intriguing. So when I read the stories, I was like, man, am I depressed, or what the hell is going on? And it wasn't that. It was just that apparently I have a fascination with that sort of thing, you know. And that book was my first one. It was very personal. It was a very personal book.
Urban Crow was very personal.
Yeah. On the second book, to be honest with you, I tried to be maybe a little bit more palatable for like an average reader, because I'm going to be honest with you. You know, I would love to think that I'm a great writer, but I just got the feeling that the subject matter that I write about is not ready for prime time consumption, because there's very little violence, there's very little sex, there's very little, like, you know, like the ghetto type drug deal. I'm a black writer apparently, but to me that life is just as black and just as African American as any, even more so than any of the things I see, because most of us are not drug dealers and hip hop artists or athletes. We live daily lives, and you know, I'm not Zane, or, you know, I'm not Donald Goins, you know, and so I think the niche that I would have to do in order to be more popular, spread out, you know, I mean, there's ways to do that, of course, but I'm not 100% interested in that. But I like people like yourself, you know, that read it and understand where I'm coming from, and can deal with like the different type of subject matter. It was funny because I had and I still use it, one of the editors that I use, I hardly ever talk to her, because it's all through emails and stuff like that, sending things back and forth to each other. You know, she's in another state. But she called me one time. She said, I just have to tell you, Thomas, that I really don't understand that story at all. She said, I don't understand at all. And instead of me having like, what, you don't understand my story? I laughed. I kind of was,
Did
and I know
what
it sounds
story
weird.
was?
Oh yeah, it was Lord Bladadia,
Okay.
and because what she was looking for at the end of the story, after it was a pretty long story, but what she was looking for was some kind of neat little package to be wrapped up and end, and this is what happens. And he's gone. We got all these things going on, and he's gone. And it made her feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable that, but is this finished? Is it finished? And it reminds me of one time that I was taking an art class and I was painting this picture, and I was having so much trouble with finishing this one picture. It's like I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm pacing, I'm going back and forth. And so the art instructor, she comes over and she said, what's going on? Look like you having a hard time with this. And I said, I am. I'm trying to figure out, what I should put here, or should I lighten this up a little bit? And so she's looking at it with me, and both of us looking at it in silence. And then she just turns and looked at me and said, maybe it's already finished. And when she said that, I don't know, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I looked at it, I was like, you know what? And not only I think it's finished, I think it's been finished for a while, and I'm keep screwing it up. The more I'm trying to put into it, that's the end of the story, you see? So when I got to that story, I was thinking the same way, like, okay, because to be honest with you, I didn't really even know where I was going to go with that, and it was just the end.
Do you think there'll be another book? Are you writing another book?
I said that would be my last one because I'm doing a lot of things, but I already got like a half a book that I have wrote since then that I'm like, I thought I wasn't going to write no more, but I find out that I can't help it. I have to write. I can't help it, And so I guess I'm always going to be writing. If I get enough stories, I'll make another book.
Would you ever make a short story out of it? Like any of the stories, would you ever make like a 15-minute short out of it? Because I think they all could be shorts.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would love to do that. And these things are, like I said, they culled from a real life. I don't write about like monsters and stuff like that. The monsters that I write about, as you already kind of alluded to, it's up here. Our demons and everything else. And most of the stories, people are battling with some sort of process that they have to get their minds wrapped around. The one had to get his mind wrapped around. There's a man coming with a gun. You got to wrap around. I got to find this guy to see if he's real. The guy in the library. I got to find out. Are these people actually sitting in this room, or is it my imagination? So all of that grappling, even though I call it the universe next door, is nothing like science fiction about it. It's a lot of it is cerebral. It's what's going on in your mind. I said, imagine. I said, just take anybody in your life, follow them around with a camera for a day, and then 2 days, 3 days, 3 months, 3 years. Follow them around with a camera. And you could tell me at the end of that, tell me what was their story arc, what was the beginning, what was the middle, end. It is nothing. It's just like daily life. And all life is not that dramatic like we see on TV. We want to be entertained, so they got to make a story arc, and it has to be. But we try to be entertained. And of course, when you read a book, you want to be entertained too, but sometimes you want to be challenged. I want to be challenged as a reader. I like books that's unconventional. I like stories that's unconventional. Hell, I like people that's unconventional. So why try to make a cookie cutter thing? Now, we can self-publish these days, and I think that's a good thing because we can go out on a limb because somebody else is going to look at this and say, nobody's going to read this, and they might be right to a certain extent. Maybe it won't be a 1,000,001 seller, but you know what? that creativity is, every once in a while, a lot of junk is produced. Don't get me wrong. Maybe 90% of it is crap. But every once in a while, you find that gem that you knew a major publishing company wouldn't have published. A major publishing company wouldn't have published. And that's what you're looking for. Sometimes you find it, sometimes you don't. So I like the fact that we can self-publish and do things and express ourselves in unconventional ways. So I spent my years in the Army, and I traveled around the world. I spent 7 years in Europe. I spent 2 years in 2 years in Korea, and I ended up coming to Colorado and retiring.
Did you always, like, through that whole time, did you always write?
Yep, I always wrote. I was what I call a closet writer. I like to express myself. I got stories now in this house somewhere that I wrote when I was about 15 years old. I think those are 14, 15. I think those are like my earliest stories. I still got a couple of them. Of course, they look like crap. But I always liked to be a writer. I never thought about doing it for a living, like I want to write books. I never thought that. I just thought that I liked to write. And actually, I wanted to be a photojournalist, where I would go out and take pictures of things and write about it. I always wanted to be a photojournalist, and that never happened. I want to thank my niece for being interested enough where she wanted to interview her uncle, which is great. And since she's talking about the book and she liked the book so much, I'm going to let everybody know who's watching this video that the book is called The Universe Next Door. And it's a book of short stories, and I think that most of you out there would like this. So if you want a copy of it, get in touch with my niece.